Erin sat in the cramped hallway of a private clinic, clutching a folder of documents. At first glance, she seemed like an ordinary young woman, tired but collected. Only her eyes revealed something hidden, fear, despair, and a hope that was on the verge of a desperate move. A month ago, her mother had learned she was ill. The diagnosis sounded like a death sentence, a rare disease, treatment abroad, a huge sum of money Erin couldn't raise in a year, or even 10. And then she was offered a contract, discreet, not public, practically secret. Surrogacy for a private client, complete confidentiality, compensation $500,000. The figure kept running through her head. $500,000 in 9 months. For a chance to save her mother. She hesitated for a long time, but when she saw her mother crying at night, trying not to make a sound, the decision came naturally. And here she was, waiting to meet the one who would change her life. The office door opened with a soft click. A woman in a formal suit emerged and invited Erin in. A man stood in the center of the spacious office hall, reserved in a perfectly tailored suit. His gaze was cold, as if built like a wall from a habit of not showing pain. "Erin Thompson?" he asked, holding out his hand. "Yes," she replied, her mouth dry. "I'm Ethan Crawford," he introduced himself. "I think you know why I'm here." She nodded. The contract lay between them, a thick stack of papers, each page reeking not only of money but of a decision from which there was no turning back. "All you need is your consent. We will provide everything else, housing, care, medical support. You must understand the child will not be yours. This is an agreement and nothing more." Erin tried to smile. "I understand, Mr. Crawford." But when their eyes met, something flickered, fleeting, almost elusive. Fatigue, pain, and something else, like loneliness. She didn't know that this moment would be the beginning of a story that would shatter all boundaries between duty, emotion, and destiny. Erin moved into Ethan's mansion a week after signing the contract. The house stood on a hill surrounded by an old garden where it once seemed only silence and wind lived. Everything was thought out to the smallest detail: a cozy room, a private doctor, a schedule of tests and consultations. And yet, in this impeccable order, there was a sense of emptiness. She often caught herself thinking that no one laughed here. Even the servants moved silently, as if afraid to disturb the invisible grief hanging in the air. "Mr. Crawford is rarely home," the housekeeper, Mrs. Hale, said quietly on the first day. "He works, and the rest of the time—" The woman hesitated. "He barely lives his own life." Erin didn't ask. She knew what was behind it. Later, from conversations with the doctor, she learned his wife died 2 years ago. An accident, but the scar left behind was deeper than a scar. One evening, when Erin was waiting for a car to the clinic, Ethan unexpectedly offered to drive her himself. The silence in the car was thick, as if an invisible wall stood between them. "Are you feeling okay?" he finally asked without taking his eyes off the road. "Yes, a little tired." "That's normal. The first weeks are always difficult." She nodded, but didn't know what to say. There was no coldness in his voice, only a quiet concern, uncertain, like a man who had long forgotten what it means to be close to someone. "Do you often drive your surrogate mothers personally?" Erin couldn't resist asking, trying to diffuse the situation. He chuckled for the first time. "No, I usually avoid situations like this." "Why?" "Because it reminds me too much of what's gone." Erin didn't ask what exactly he was talking about. She just felt a tug inside. Several weeks passed. The ultrasound showed that the pregnancy was developing perfectly. A tiny heartbeat flickered on the screen, and for the first time, Erin felt that this wasn't just someone else's baby. When the doctor left, leaving them alone, Ethan was still staring at the monitor. His fingers were shaking. "Is it her?" Erin asked, not knowing why she said it. "Yes, a girl." He exhaled as if he'd been holding it for 2 years. A moment hung in the air. Ethan turned and their eyes met. For the first time in forever there was no ice in his eyes, only vulnerability and gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "Because she's alive." Erin didn't answer, because at that moment she felt something change between them, imperceptibly, like a step beyond a line they both hadn't intended to cross. 3 months passed. The pregnancy was proceeding smoothly, and the house gradually stopped seeming cold to Erin. Every morning she woke to the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Ethan, it turned out, was the first one to get up. He no longer hid in his office and often stopped by to see how she was feeling. At first these were formal phrases, short and restrained. "Have you eaten today? Don't forget to drink water." But then something else appeared, casual, almost homely. "You know, you frown funny when you read," he said one day passing by. Erin laughed. "And you're too serious to notice." "That's good. Someone has to keep order in this chaos." He said it with a slight smile, but there was more than a joke in his gaze. Sometimes in the evenings they sat on the veranda, Erin with a mug of cocoa, Ethan with a glass of wine. They talked about simple things, the weather, books, how difficult it can be to start life anew. She felt a connection forming between them, fragile but alive. In moments like these, she forgot that there was a contract between them, that the child she was carrying wasn't legally hers, but the closer they grew, the more clearly Erin sensed something was changing around her. Ethan's phone calls became shorter. He began to visit the office more often, as if he were avoiding something. One day, as she passed his office, she heard voices. A woman. A sharp tone. "You can't let her stay. It's against the rules, Ethan. It's madness." Erin froze at the door. "This woman. She's just fulfilling the terms of the contract. Don't confuse pity with emotion." It was his late wife's mother, a cold, domineering woman named Marion. It was she who insisted that their daughter's embryo be preserved. To her, Erin was just an instrument, a vessel, nothing more. When Marion left, noticing Erin, she gave him a look full of disdain. "You've forgotten who you are. Remember, this isn't your child, and you're not part of this family." Erin didn't answer. She just clasped her hands to her stomach, as if protecting the tiny life inside. Later that night, she received a text. "You don't have to stay here if you're struggling." It was Ethan. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Her fingers trembled, but she typed a reply. "I'll stay, as long as it takes, you and her." She hit send and, for the first time in a long time, began to cry, not from fear, but from feeling more than she should. Erin increasingly found herself waiting for his footsteps, the sound of his car at the gate, the soft click of the door, and her heart began to beat faster. She convinced herself it was simply gratitude, that he had saved her mother, given her a chance she would never have had. But gratitude doesn't make the heart skip a beat. Sometimes Ethan stayed home longer than usual. He began helping her with little things, handling a book, straightening a blanket, making tea. And every time there was an awkward pause between them, too long to be accidental. "You worry about me too much, Mr. Crawford," she said one day with a smile. "I just want to make sure everything is okay." "And if everything is okay, will you stop coming?" He froze. For a moment something warm, almost dangerous, flickered in his eyes. "No, I won't stop." The words hung in the air. A few days later he suggested going into town just for a change of scenery. They walked through the park, drank coffee, and for the first time in a long time, Erin felt like an ordinary woman, not someone's project. That evening on the way home, it started to rain. They took shelter under the canopy of the old gazebo. Ethan stood next to her, so close that Erin could feel his breath. "Sometimes I think this is all wrong," she whispered. "I shouldn't feel the way I feel." "What if I feel the same?" he answered quietly. The world seemed to stop. They looked at each other and neither dared to take a step. Then he simply touched her hand carefully, as if afraid to ruin the moment. But the happiness did not last long. A couple of days later, Marian arrived at the house. Unannounced, uninvited, she entered like a storm, bringing with her a chill. "You're playing with fire, Ethan." Her voice was firm. "I see what's happening. You're forgetting whose daughter this is, and who she belongs to. This girl is not a thing, Marian. But the woman who carries her is temporary. After the birth, she will leave. By contract. And you signed it yourself." Erin stood outside the door, hearing every word. Her chest tightened. She knew Marian was right, legally, but her heart refused to believe that, after the baby was born, she would have to simply walk away. Later, after Marian had left, Erin found Ethan in the garden. He was sitting on a bench, his head bowed. "She doesn't understand," he said quietly. "I just want this to end without pain." "What if that's no longer possible?" Erin asked. He looked at her, and there was no answer in his gaze. Only pain and something else that made her feel both terrified and sweet at the same time. Another week passed. The house seemed to hold its breath. The ease between Erin and Ethan was gone. They both knew they'd crossed a line, but they didn't know how to move on. Erin tried to avoid meeting up. She read, walked in the garden, listened to music. But the moment he appeared at the door, all attempts to forget were shattered. One night, with rain pounding the windows, she woke in pain. A sharp spasm, the first signal that it was time to go to the hospital. She called for a nurse, but Ethan entered the room instead. "What happened?" "I think contractions. Too early." He didn't say a word, simply scooped her up and carried her to the car. On the way to the clinic, he held her hand, squeezing her fingers, as if trying to transfer some of his strength to her. When it was over, the doctors reassured her. A false alarm, the baby was fine. But Erin lay on the hospital bed, quietly crying, not from pain, but from fear of losing not only the child, but everything that had grown between them. Later, Ethan came into the room. He looked tired, but his eyes were soft. "You scared me," he said, sitting down next to her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "It's not that. I just realized I can't let you go." Erin looked up. "Ethan, don't say that. We can't. You signed the contract yourself. The contract can be broken." "What about feelings?" He didn't answer. He only ran his hand through her hair. And in that moment, when she allowed herself to press against him for the first time, everything else ceased to matter. He leaned down, and their lips met, tenderly, carefully, with the caution felt by two people who know the price of loss. The next days became like a dream. They didn't hide, they simply allowed themselves to be together. He brought her breakfast, read his late wife's letters aloud, told her how long it had been since he'd allowed himself to feel again, and she listened and fell deeper and deeper in love. But behind every moment of happiness lurked a shadow. Marian. She knew she wouldn't let it go, and indeed soon came a notice. The law firm demanded confirmation that after Erin gave birth, she was obligated to hand over the child and leave the country. Ethan clutched the document as if he wanted to tear it to shreds. "They don't have the right," he began. But you gave them that right, Erin quietly reminded. Silence fell in the room. She knew there would be a fight ahead, for the child, for love, for something that wasn't legally hers but was her everything in her heart. The letter from the law firm was just the beginning. A few days later, Marian arrived in person, unannounced, accompanied by a lawyer and 2 men in formal suits. Erin was sitting in the garden at the time, reading a book. When the cars pulled up at the gate, she felt her heart sink. Marian was the first to step out, elegant and collected, with that expression on her face that made her feel cold. "I hope you understand, Miss Thompson, that this has gone too far." Erin stood up. "If you're talking about the child, I'm doing everything as agreed. I haven't violated anything." "Oh, we have, more than once." Marian nodded to the lawyer, who pulled out a folder. "We have photographs, proof of your close relationship with Mr. Crawford. This is a direct violation of the Personal Boundaries Clause. The contract is voidable, which means all your rights disappear along with it." Erin felt the ground shift from under her feet. "Do you want to take the child?" "I want to protect my daughter's memory," Marian replied coldly. "You are a stranger who decided to take advantage of someone else's tragedy." Erin said nothing. She knew any words would only make things worse. When Ethan returned that evening, he found her at the window, her eyes red, clutching that very contract. "She was here," Erin said, "threatening me. Said it would all end as soon as the girl was born." Ethan came closer and put his hand on her shoulder. "I won't let her. She won't harm you or the baby. You can't stop her legally." "Then I'll change the law." He spoke calmly, but there was steel in his voice. For the first time, Erin saw him not just as a man, but as a man willing to go all the way. They spent several days in tension. Ethan hired his own lawyers and began preparing a counterclaim, but everything was moving too slowly. Marian acted faster. Rumors appeared in the press, hints that Erin was an adventurer hunting for the billionaire's fortune. The next day she received a call from the clinic. The scheduled appointment had been cancelled at the client's request. She was removed from the program without explanation. "She's cutting off all escape routes," Ethan said, clenching his fists. "She wants to force you to leave before the birth." "And if I don't leave? Then we'll need to hide, at least for a while." Erin looked at him, not believing he was saying that. "Hide? Where?" "Somewhere no one will find us, where you can give birth to our daughter in peace." He said "our," and that word changed everything forever. A week later, late in the evening, they left the house, without luggage, without security, only with the bare necessities. The mansion where their story had begun was left behind. After the girl's birth, the days merged into one continuous whirlwind of worries, paperwork and visits from lawyers. The house by the sea ceased to be a refuge. It became a temporary fortress. Erin barely slept. She held the baby in her arms, listened to her breathing, and thought about how it would all end if the law proved stronger than love. Ethan sat nearby, reviewing papers, talking with lawyers, arguing with someone on the phone. Occasionally he stopped, looked at Erin and whispered, "I won't let them take you. Not you, not her." He was calm only on the surface. Inside, everything was burning. A hearing was scheduled a few days later. Marian had secured an expedited procedure. She wanted the child recognized as the sole heir of the Crawford family, without mentioning the mother-in-law. Erin, in fact, had no legal rights. The contract was drafted in such a way as to deprive her of any possibility of custody. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. The press, lawyers, representatives of Ethan's late wife's foundation were present. Erin sat next to him, clasping her hands as if her life depended on it. Marian entered majestically, wearing a black suit with a cold confidence in every step. When the women's gazes met, Erin, for the first time, did not look away. The judge began the hearing. Marian's lawyer spoke of a breach of contract, of the moral impermissibility of a relationship between an employer and a surrogate mother. He listed articles, paragraphs, documents. Everything sounded heartless, as if they were talking not about people, but about points on a spreadsheet. Then Ethan stood. He spoke calmly, but every word cut the air. Yes, the contract was breached, but not out of self-interest, not out of deception, but because real feelings lay behind those terms. My daughter was born not from a deal, but from love. I don't deny that I signed the papers, but now I understand. No document can deprive a person of the right to love. Silence fell in the courtroom. The judge turned his gaze to Erin. Miss Thompson, is there anything you want to add? Erin stood up, clasping her hands. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for a name. I just want to be close to the daughter I carried for 9 months, who I felt with every cell. And yes, I broke the contract, because I stopped being just a body and became a mother. The judge was silent for a long time. The decision was announced in the evening. The contract was declared invalid due to circumstances contrary to human nature and the right to personal liberty. The child remained with her mother and father officially. Marian left the courtroom without a word. Ethan caught up with her at the door. I didn't want a war. You destroyed the memory of my daughter, she whispered. No, I gave her child a chance to live and to love. She turned away, and he knew there would be no forgiveness. Erin stood at the entrance to the courthouse, holding the girl in her arms. The wind ruffled the strands of her hair, the sun breaking through the clouds. Ethan came over and put his hand on her shoulder. It's all over now, he said quietly. No, Ethan, it's just beginning. He smiled, truly for the first time. Then let's start together. And when she looked at him, it seemed to her that there was no longer any pain or loss in his eyes, only light. The light in which the three of them lived.